She was seconds from ending it all. 8 months pregnant, barefoot on a rooftop, whispering apologies to a father who disowned her and curses to the man who used her. Then a voice, deep, steady, unfamiliar, cut through the night. Don't jump. That voice belonged to a broken millionaire, ruined by betrayal, clinging to the last fragments of his own life. Neither of them expected the other to save them. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The wind howled like a warning, tearing through the stillness of the night as if the city itself sensed the tragedy about to unfold. From the rooftop of a 26-story office building, the streets below looked like glowing threads, distant and indifferent. No one would notice. No one would care. That thought settled like lead in Anita Barlow's chest. She stood barefoot on the cold concrete, her swollen belly silhouetted against the city lights. The maternity gown fluttered around her legs, clinging to her skin with every gust. 8 months along and utterly alone. Her hands trembled as they clutched the rusting railing, her eyes unfocused, glassy with tears that refused to fall anymore. How did it come to this? Once, she was the bright, defiant daughter of Leonard Barlow, the iron-fisted magnate who built an empire with his name alone. She had lived in penthouses, wore designer labels before she could spell them, and dined in restaurants where meals were crafted, not cooked. And yet, none of that mattered to her. What mattered was love. And she had found it, or thought she had, with Derek Langford, a charming man with boyish good looks and a silver tongue. He had wooed her like she was the only woman in the world. When he proposed, she didn't hesitate. Not even when her father warned her. Not even when he threatened to cut her off. Love is enough, she had told him, naive and unwavering. I'd rather be poor and in love than rich and alone. So, her father had disowned her. The fall from luxury was harsh, but she endured it with grace. She believed love would catch her. But it didn't. Derek changed the moment the last door closed behind her. He stopped returning calls. He came home late, if at all. And then, one day, he simply didn't come home at all. A week later, she found out why. He had moved in with Clara Whitmore, the youngest daughter of an elite banking family. Clara had everything Anita had given up, and Derek had everything he wanted: status, connections, and financial security. It was never about love. It was never about her. Derek had been using her, using the idea of access to her family's wealth. Once her father cut ties, she was worthless to him. The betrayal shattered something deep inside her. Not just the heartbreak, but the shame. The realization that she had sacrificed everything for someone who had only been pretending. Her pride, her name, her future, all of it gone. And now she was carrying his child. The tears came back with a vengeance, hot and bitter. She sobbed quietly into the night, her shoulders shaking. No one had come after her. Not her father. Not Derek. Not friends. No one. It was as if she had vanished from the world the moment she became inconvenient. She stepped onto the ledge. The wind felt different here, more real, more honest. Her eyes closed, and for a moment there was peace. The kind of peace that only surrender could offer. She placed one hand over her stomach. The baby kicked softly in response. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this. I can't bring you into a world where no one wants us. In my next life, I won't forgive him. And Father, if you ever think of me, please forgive me for this." She inhaled deeply, tasting the night air one last time. Then, "Don't jump." The voice cut through the silence like a blade. Deep, calm, and full of urgency. She gasped, startled. Her eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, hands raised. Not to grab her, but as if trying to hold the moment still. "Please," he said again, his voice softer now. "Nothing is worth taking your life for. Especially not someone who treated you like nothing. Especially not when you're carrying life inside you." Anita stared at him, blinking back tears. She didn't know who he was, where he came from, or why he was even there. But his eyes, they weren't just trying to stop her. They understood her. I've lost things too, he said, taking a cautious step forward. Money. Family. People I loved. I've been where you are. Maybe not the same pain, but close enough. And I'm telling you, it doesn't stay like this. The city rumbled beneath them, uncaring. But in that rooftop silence, something shifted. Her heart was still broken. The despair still clung to her. But this man, this stranger, stood between her and the edge, not with force, but with presence. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her lips trembled. "Anita." He nodded. "Anita. I'm Ethan. You don't have to do this. Not tonight. Not ever. Come down from there. Let's talk. Let's figure this out together." Her legs gave out before she could answer. She crumpled to the floor, sobbing into her hands. Ethan rushed forward, gently catching her, holding her like she was glass, fragile but precious. And just like that, she wasn't alone anymore. The echo of her sobs filled the rooftop as Ethan Cole crouched beside her, unsure of where to begin. She wasn't just crying. She was unraveling. Her entire body shook with each breath, like the weight of everything she'd carried had finally broken through. And yet, even in her vulnerability, there was a quiet dignity about her, something Ethan couldn't quite name. He didn't touch her again, just sat there, one knee bent, arms resting loosely on his thighs, waiting until her pain began to slow into exhausted silence. Only then did he speak. "Let me take you somewhere warm." She didn't look at him at first. Her fingers pressed against the rooftop concrete like she needed to feel something real. Finally, she nodded. Slowly. Barely. Ethan helped her to her feet, keeping his movements gentle, cautious. Her body was weak, her steps uncertain, but she leaned into him just enough to stay upright. Not trust, just need. He didn't say a word as he guided her down the stairwell, her small hand trembling in his. They stepped out into the night air at ground level. The city felt different here. Busier. Louder. Less like the end and more like the world spinning on, unaware of her pain. Ethan helped her into his car, a sleek black SUV with a worn interior. Clearly well used, clearly not just for show. The warmth of the seat made her shiver. "Do you need a hospital?" he asked gently as he pulled onto the road. Anita shook her head. "No, just not here." He didn't press. He didn't ask more than that. Just nodded, focused on the road ahead, and drove. 30 minutes later, they pulled into the private drive of a quiet property nestled in the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a mansion. More like a well-kept estate home, modern, but lived in. Lights glowed warmly from within, and ivy curled lazily over stone walls. He led her into a cozy guest house just behind the main home. It smelled of cedar and clean linens, and the soft hum of an air purifier filled the quiet space. There was a fireplace, a large couch with a knitted throw tossed over the side, and a small kitchenette. "This place is yours," he said, setting down a blanket. "Stay as long as you need." Anita looked around, disoriented. I can't stay here. I don't even know who you are." He hesitated, then gave her the truth. "My name is Ethan Cole. I run a tech company, or I used to. Things aren't great right now." Anita narrowed her eyes slightly. She had heard that name before. Somewhere in passing. A headline. A financial blog. "You're the CEO of Echelon Dynamics." He blinked, mildly surprised. "I was." The bitterness in his tone said more than the words did. He turned away to pour her a glass of water, then handed it to her without meeting her eyes. She accepted it quietly. "I had a business partner," he continued, seating himself on a chair across from her. "He embezzled. Our last big investor pulled out after that. We've been bleeding ever since." Anita looked at him for the first time. Really looked. He had the kind of face that success had once kissed, angular, clean-cut, but wearied. The fine lines around his eyes weren't from age alone. They were etched from stress, from betrayal, from sleepless nights. His tie was loosened, shirt untucked, and the shadows under his eyes told stories of their own. "You saved me," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "You didn't need saving. You just needed someone to remind you that you matter." A silence settled between them. Not awkward, just heavy. Like they were both carrying too much but had no words left to explain it. She looked down at her belly. I haven't even picked a name yet. You still have time. She nodded, tears beginning again, softer now. Ethan stood and opened a small linen closet. There's fresh towels. Take a shower if you'd like. Rest. No one will bother you here. In the morning, we can figure out next steps. He turned to leave, giving her space. But just as he reached the door, her voice caught him. Ethan, he paused. I'm Anita. Anita Barlow. The name landed in the air like a thrown stone. Ethan turned back to her slowly. The name was unmistakable. Barlow, as in Leonard Barlow, one of the largest private investors his company had ever courted. The man who had cut ties just months ago when things started falling apart. Anita saw the flicker of recognition in Ethan's face. You know my father. He hesitated. I do. Her face clouded. Don't tell him about me. Please. I don't want his pity. Or his money. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I won't say a word. Another silence. This one warmer. Like something unspoken had passed between them. A pact of sorts. Thank you, she whispered. He offered a faint smile before stepping out and gently closing the door behind him. Later that night, as Anita curled under the thick guest house blanket, her hand resting protectively on her belly, she thought about the stranger who had appeared like an angel in a moment of absolute despair. And across the courtyard in his study, Ethan stared at an old photograph, one of him and his former business partner in happier times, and slowly placed it face down. He had gone up to that rooftop to clear his head, maybe even to ask himself if it was worth continuing to fight. Instead, he found her, and something deep inside him whispered, maybe this wasn't a coincidence after all. The early morning light spilled across the wooden floor of the guest house in long, golden bands. Anita stirred, the scent of lavender from freshly laundered sheets lingering faintly in the air. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The silence, the softness. It was nothing like the one-bedroom apartment she had struggled to maintain after Derek left. It wasn't cold or heavy with unpaid bills or hollow with loneliness. Then the memory hit her like a slow wave. The rooftop, the voice, the man who had saved her life. She turned her head and found a tray on the nightstand. Warm tea, a bowl of fresh fruit, a single note written in neat, angular handwriting. I'm in the main house. Take your time. There's no rush. Ethan. She stared at the note for a long moment, as if it might dissolve into dust if she blinked. Something inside her curled at the edges, something fragile and unfamiliar. Kindness. From someone who didn't owe her anything. She showered slowly, cautiously, like her body still didn't quite believe it was safe. The warm water soothed the tightness in her back and the ache in her calves. The pregnancy had become more taxing over the past week, and with no one to help, she had simply endured. But here, in this quiet sanctuary, the tension in her limbs began to ebb. When she finally stepped into the main house, her fingers nervously clutching her sleeves, Ethan was standing in the kitchen. The scent of coffee and toast filled the room. He looked up, offering a tired but genuine smile. Good morning. Anita nodded, eyes scanning the space. The house was sleek but warm, hardwood floors, dark countertops, sunlight flooding in through floor-to-ceiling windows. Not extravagant. Not sterile. Just real. Did you sleep okay? She nodded again. Yes. Better than I have in months. Good. He poured her a mug of tea and handed it to her without asking. Not assuming, just understanding. That word again. It wrapped itself around her cautiously, like a blanket she didn't know she needed. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the silence between them no longer stiff or awkward. Just quiet. After a while, Anita spoke. I haven't seen my father in almost a year. Ethan looked up but said nothing. When I told him I was pregnant, he said, don't come back with regrets. Like he was already waiting for me to fail. Did you love him? Ethan asked softly. Derek. She laughed bitterly. I thought I did. I thought I was being brave, choosing love over wealth. But he wasn't in love with me. He was in love with the idea of who I was, or what he could get from me. Ethan's jaw tensed. His fingers wrapped around his mug, knuckles white. I was in love with my business partner once, he said after a pause. Not romantically, but I trusted him like a brother. Built everything beside him. Then he siphoned off a third of our funding, disappeared overnight. Left me with lawsuits, debt, and a company I barely recognize. Their eyes met, two broken mirrors reflecting pieces of each other. In the days that followed, something began to grow in the silence between them. He took care of her, not in a possessive or controlling way, but with quiet consideration. He stocked the guest house with groceries, found her a midwife for weekly checkups, drove her to appointments without being asked, and waited patiently in the parking lot, never pressing. She learned small things about him, piece by piece. That he played the piano when he couldn't sleep. That he refused to fire his assistant even though the company could barely afford payroll. That he kept a photo of his late mother in the hallway, smiling in a garden full of wildflowers. Ethan learned about her too. That she once dreamed of becoming a writer. That she could recite poetry from memory. That she talked to her unborn daughter like she was already here, whispering stories in the quiet of the guest house late at night. One evening, a storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked the sky open, and rain slammed against the windows with wild urgency. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Anita was in the living room, wrapped in a thick sweater Ethan had given her, watching the fire crackle in the stone hearth. Ethan entered carrying 2 bowls of steaming lentil stew, carefully balanced. "Hope you're hungry." She smiled faintly. "Always." He sat beside her, their legs just inches apart. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have survived something terrible and don't need words to explain it. "I used to hate storms," Anita said after a while. "When I was a kid, I'd hide under the bed." "What changed?" "I guess now I like knowing something outside of me is louder than the chaos inside." He looked at her then, really looked at her. Hair curled slightly from the humidity, eyes shadowed but still bright, a small smile playing on her lips like a scar finally healing. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. She looked away, blinking hard. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to. You're here. That's enough." The fire crackled. The storm howled. And between the thunder and silence, something wordless passed between them. Mutual respect, unspoken trust, maybe even the earliest breath of something deeper. Anita shifted slightly, laying her hand across her belly. The baby kicked and Ethan's eyes widened. "Did she just?" "She kicks when she hears your voice," Anita said with a small laugh. "I think she likes you." Ethan chuckled softly, brushing a hand over his jaw. "Well, she's got good taste." That night, as the storm raged on, Anita stood at the window of the guest house, watching lightning fracture the sky like broken glass. Her reflection stared back at her, haunted still but alive. She touched her stomach gently, and for the first time in a long time, she whispered, "We're going to be okay." Across the courtyard, in the stillness of his study, Ethan sat at his desk, pen in hand, staring at a proposal for a potential investor. He had written and rewritten the pitch a dozen times in the past week. But now, something felt different. Not easier, just clearer. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, 2 lives slowly began to rebuild, brick by brick, breath by breath, in the shelter of a shared storm. The days grew longer. The baby grew heavier. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Anita no longer marked her time in heartbreak. She had moved from mere survival to something she barely recognized, peace. It crept in slowly, almost suspiciously. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning. The warmth of a folded blanket on the couch when she dozed off. The rhythmic sound of Ethan's footsteps pacing his study late at night while working on yet another pitch deck. The echo of her own laughter, returning like a bird that had forgotten its way home. She wasn't fixed, but she was healing. And so was he. In the main house, Ethan stood before a mirror, adjusting his collar for the 5th time. His company, Echelon Dynamics, was finally beginning to surface from the wreckage. A new investor was flying in that morning. someone he'd been chasing for almost 9 months. This was the kind of meeting that could shift the tide. But his mind wasn't on the pitch. It was on the woman in the guest house. The woman who had once stood at the edge of a rooftop and now sat in the garden each morning, sipping herbal tea and talking to her unborn daughter as though nothing else in the world mattered. She had changed the air in his house. She had made it breathable again. That afternoon, after his investor meeting, Ethan returned to the house in a whirlwind of disbelief and adrenaline. "I think it's happening," he said, eyes bright, tie half loosened. "I think we're finally going to get the capital to stay afloat and expand." Anita stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing a flowy maternity dress and stirring something on the stove. She looked up and smiled. "You did it," she said simply. "No," he said, walking over. "We did it. I've never pitched with that much clarity before. I didn't even need the notes. You know what changed? I finally believed what I was saying. I wasn't selling desperation. I was offering vision." Anita's smile widened. "That's the man I met on the roof." He grew serious, reaching over to gently brush a strand of hair from her cheek. "That man was broken. So was I." Their eyes met, lingering too long, but neither looked away. 2 weeks later, Anita went into labor. It started in the middle of the night. A sharp pain in her lower back pulled her from sleep. She breathed through it at first, not wanting to wake anyone. But when the pain came again, harder, deeper, she knew it was time. She called out once, and Ethan was there. Panic flickered across his face, but he moved with precision. He carried her bag to the car, helped her inside, called the midwife, and ignored every red light between the house and the clinic. Anita's hand gripped his tightly during every contraction, her forehead damp, her breathing erratic. "I can't," she gasped at one point, voice cracking. "It hurts too much." Ethan leaned in close, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "You're doing it, Anita. You're already doing it. And you're not alone." Hours later, after screams and sweat, and the kind of pain that cracked something sacred open, a cry filled the room. A tiny, furious, perfect cry. They placed the baby on Anita's chest, and she burst into tears, her arms wrapping around the squirming body of her daughter like she'd found a missing piece of her soul. Eliana Grace Barlow. That was the name she whispered. Ethan stood a few steps away, frozen, not with fear, but with awe. He had seen pitch decks worth millions, sat in boardrooms with billionaires. But nothing had ever looked as miraculous as the sight of Anita, exhausted and radiant, holding the child she'd nearly died to protect. She looked up at him. "She's here," she said softly. He stepped closer. "She's beautiful. She likes you already." He laughed through the lump in his throat. "She has excellent judgment." The weeks that followed were a flurry of bottles, diapers, late-night feedings, and moments so tender they ached. Ethan had never held a baby before Eliana. He was awkward at first, afraid he'd break her. But Anita showed him how to cradle her head, how to rock her gently when she fussed, how to whisper lullabies under his breath until her breathing evened out. More than once, Anita woke to find Eliana asleep on Ethan's chest, his head tipped back on the couch, his hand resting protectively over her tiny back. They had become a unit, something that defied definition. One morning, an unexpected call came through. Leonard Barlow. Ethan stared at the caller ID for several seconds before answering. "Mr. Cole," Leonard said briskly. "I heard my daughter had a child. I'd like to see her." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. The old man had always wielded words like weapons. "She's safe," Ethan replied evenly. "And doing well. I want to speak with her. I'll ask her." There was a pause. Then Leonard's tone softened slightly. "Ethan, thank you for not calling me sooner. I needed to hear this news from someone who wasn't demanding anything in return." When Ethan told Anita, her first reaction was cold silence. "I don't owe him anything," she said. "You don't," Ethan agreed. "But maybe you owe yourself a chance to say what you've been holding on to." The meeting took place 2 days later at a quiet, private restaurant Leonard rented out entirely for the occasion. Anita walked in wearing a soft gray dress, Eliana cradled in her arms. Her father stood at the window, his expression unreadable. "You cut me off," she said without preamble. "I thought I was protecting you," Leonard replied, "from making a mistake. You weren't protecting me. You were controlling me. And when I needed you most, you abandoned me." Silence. A long, painful one. Then, "You're right." Anita blinked. "I was proud and wrong and too afraid to admit it. But I'm here now, and I want to be part of her life. If you'll let me." Anita looked down at her daughter, then back at her father. "You'll never control me again." Leonard nodded. "That's fair." She stepped forward and handed Eliana to him. The old man's hands shook as he held his granddaughter for the first time. "She looks like you," he whispered. "She'll have her own mind," Anita replied. "Like me." That night, back at the house, Anita found Ethan on the porch, watching the stars. She stepped beside him, arms folded. "He cried," she said. Ethan smiled. "You broke him a little. That's probably good for him." Anita looked at him. "You saved me." "I didn't save you," he said. "You just didn't have anyone reminding you that you were worth saving." She moved closer, her voice lower now. "You remind me every day." He turned toward her then. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But their foreheads touched, and for a long moment, everything in the world went quiet except for the soft breath they shared between them. Together, they had risen, not perfectly, not without scars, but they had risen. And it was only the beginning. It began slowly. A subtle shift in how they moved around each other. The way Ethan lingered just a little longer when handing Eliana back to Anita. The soft hesitation in Anita's gaze when she'd catch him working late, jaw tense, hair tousled, sleeves rolled back. There was no dramatic declaration. No urgent kiss in the rain. Just an understanding that built like music, note by quiet note. They had fallen into rhythm now. Not survival, life. Ethan's company had stabilized. With the new investor backing Echelon Dynamics, operations resumed at full strength. Employees who had gone unpaid for months received back pay. The lawsuit that once threatened to bury him quietly disappeared in the wake of a clean audit. He offered his assistant a raise. She cried in the elevator. And while Ethan rebuilt his empire, Anita built something of her own. It started with one woman. A young girl she met at the clinic who had been kicked out by her parents after getting pregnant. Anita brought her groceries, helped her find a shelter, sat with her during labor when no one else showed up. Afterward, Anita stayed up all night in the guest house, her laptop glowing faintly in the dark, her fingers tapping furiously at the keyboard. When Ethan found her the next morning, she was surrounded by notes, articles, a business plan halfway finished, and Eliana sleeping beside her. "I want to build something," she told him, eyes shining. "A place for girls like me. Like her. A center, support, counseling, housing, childcare. All of it." He smiled at her like she'd just handed him something sacred. "What do you need?" Anita blinked. "You mean? I mean, what do you need?" That's how the Eliana Foundation was born. The press caught wind of it quickly. The daughter of billionaire Leonard Barlow, once disowned, now championing single mothers and launching a nonprofit that struck at the heart of a quiet epidemic. They loved the story. The fall and the rise. The scandal and the redemption. But what no headline captured was the truth behind it. The nights Anita woke up in a cold sweat remembering the rooftop. The guilt that still lingered in her bones like fog on water. The quiet strength it took to walk into boardrooms and ask for funding. Not for herself, but for the hundreds of women she hadn't even met yet. And Ethan, he was always there. In the audience at every launch. Holding Eliana when Anita spoke. Driving her to donor meetings and waiting patiently outside. They weren't lovers. Not yet. But the love was there. Unmistakable. One night, after a gala for the foundation, Anita stepped out onto the balcony of a rooftop venue, her heels dangling from one hand, her dress glittering beneath the moonlight. She leaned on the railing and stared down, not in despair this time, but reflection. She didn't notice Ethan step out behind her until she heard his voice. "I've seen you in a lot of rooms, Anita. But tonight," he paused. "You owned it." She turned, smiling. "You mean I didn't trip in these heels?" He chuckled. You've come a long way from the woman in the storm. Her smile faded into something softer. She stepped toward him slowly. You've been there through all of it. I wanted to be. They stood there, close now, the wind gently tugging at her curls. Anita searched his eyes, her voice a whisper. What are we doing, Ethan? He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. Trying not to ruin something that's already beautiful. She didn't pull away when he reached for her hand. She didn't speak when his fingers laced with hers. She didn't stop him when he leaned in. Their first kiss wasn't urgent. It didn't demand. It offered. It asked. And when their lips met, it felt like closing a book and opening a door at the same time. The shift was complete. Now, they were not just cohabiting souls or mutual healers. They were partners. In work. In parenting. In rebuilding their lives. Ethan moved some of his office work to the house so he could spend more time with Ileana. He learned to change diapers one-handed while answering calls from VCs. Anita teased him mercilessly when he wore mismatched socks and didn't realize it until a board meeting. Anita, now a public figure in the philanthropic world, began mentoring young mothers at the foundation. She told her story not with shame, but with quiet pride, and a warning to love carefully, to trust slowly, to forgive deeply. They were strong apart. But together, they were something else entirely. A force. A balance. A storm calmed. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the garden's edge, Leonard Barlow arrived for dinner. He'd become a weekly fixture now, stubborn in his affection for his granddaughter, tentative in his rebuilding of trust with Anita. He watched Ethan carefully that night. How the man held his daughter's hand beneath the table, how Eliana squealed with joy when he picked her up, how he said our family instead of your daughter. And when the night was over, Leonard pulled Ethan aside on the porch. She trusts you, the older man said, voice low. Ethan nodded. I trust her too. Leonard paused, as though calculating risk. Don't betray that, he said finally. She survived too much to be hurt again. Ethan looked the man in the eye and said with quiet conviction, I'd burn the world before I let anyone hurt her. Leonard didn't smile, but he nodded once. It was the only blessing Ethan would ever get, and the only one he needed. That night, as Anita tucked Eliana into her crib, Ethan stood at the doorway, watching. She turned, brushing a finger to her lips and whispering, Shoo, she's out. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something small and velvet. I was going to wait, he said. Make it perfect. Do the flowers, the dinner, the whole thing. But then I saw you tonight, standing in front of that room full of people, owning your story, and I realized there's never going to be a better moment than this. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, opened the box. A simple ring. Elegant. Honest. Like everything they had built. Marry me, Anita. Not because we've survived hell together, but because I want to build heaven with you. She didn't cry. She just smiled and whispered, yes. Then they kissed again. Not for the first time, but for every time to come. The newspapers called him a con man. Derek Langford used to love the spotlight. Used to bask in the way people looked at him. Polished, charming, ambitious. A man on the rise. But the man in the mugshot that splashed across tabloids and business blogs looked nothing like the man who once convinced a Barlow daughter to throw away her entire life for him. His suit was wrinkled. His hair thin and unkempt. His eyes, once smug with charm, were bloodshot and wide with disbelief. The caption read, Social climber turned scammer. Derek Langford arrested in multi-million-dollar romance fraud scheme. His face, now infamous, had become the cautionary tale he once mocked. The fall wasn't sudden. It was slow and desperate, the way men unravel when they lose the very thing they built their entire worth around. Perception. After Anita was disowned, Derek had tasted wealth's withdrawal like a man gasping for air in a vacuum. He thought she'd come crawling back. Thought she'd beg her father for a second chance. He never expected her to vanish, and even less so, to keep the child. When she didn't return to him, he pivoted fast, like a snake looking for new ground. Clara Whitmore was the perfect mark, Ivy League old money, emotionally starved for a man who listened. He slipped into her world with ease, memorizing the names of her horses, pretending to care about the sustainability of her family's investment portfolio. He played the part of the perfect fiancé. But what Derek hadn't calculated was that true elite families don't marry opportunists, they vet them. By the time Clara's family discovered that Derek was funneling money into offshore accounts, the damage had spread. Other women surfaced. Similar patterns. Charm. Promises. Small investments turned into large debts. Broken engagements, drained savings, shattered reputations. It was a financial predator's trail, and Derek was at the center. And this time, no charm could save him. The news reached Anita on a quiet morning. Eliana had just fallen asleep on Ethan's chest in the living room, and the soft hum of a lullaby played from a speaker nearby. Anita was scrolling headlines absent-mindedly when she saw the story. His face. A pang shot through her, not of sadness, not even anger. Just a dull echo of the past. Like hearing an old song you used to cry to, but now only makes you blink and move on. She stared at it for a moment longer, then turned the screen off and looked toward Ethan. He was swaying slowly with Eliana, his eyes closed, his lips brushing her tiny forehead. Anita exhaled deeply. He's been arrested. Ethan looked up. Derek. She nodded. Ethan didn't ask for details. He just nodded once and said, "Good." There was nothing more to be said. The past had finally closed its jaws on the man who once held her life hostage. Later that week, the news broke publicly. Messages came pouring into Anita's foundation, reporters asking for comment, former friends resurfacing with apologies, podcast hosts inviting her for interviews. But Anita said nothing. Instead, she prepared for the Eliana Foundation's first national gala, an event that would bring together donors, activists, and policymakers to highlight the organization's work supporting vulnerable mothers and children. Ethan helped with logistics. Leonard funded the venue. And Anita, dressed in a sleek midnight blue gown, her curls pinned like a crown, walked onto that stage with her daughter in the front row and her future beside her. The spotlight warmed her face, but she didn't blink. She stared directly into the crowd and spoke. "I once believed that love meant sacrifice. That to prove my worth, I had to give everything. I walked away from a life of security for a man who promised forever, only to discover I was a stepping stone in his plan." A hush fell over the room. "I stood on a rooftop once, ready to end my life and my child's. And in that moment, I believed no one would care. That I was ruined. Forgotten." She glanced at Ethan, his hands folded, eyes locked on hers. "But someone reminded me that night that life is worth fighting for, especially when it doesn't go the way we planned." She took a breath. "Eliana, my daughter, saved me. And so did the stranger who became my family. Today, we don't stand here because we avoided pain. We stand here because we walked through it together." The crowd rose to their feet, applause crashing like thunder. But Anita didn't bask in it. She stepped off the stage and went straight to her daughter, lifting Eliana into her arms. The baby giggled, reaching for her necklace. Ethan kissed Anita's temple, and together they stood, not in triumph, but in quiet victory. Months passed. Derek was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His assets were seized. Clara moved overseas, changed her name, and never looked back. No one came to Derek's sentencing. No family. No friends. Not even a lawyer who believed in him. In his cell, surrounded by cement and silence, he watched the televised replay of Anita's speech on a smuggled phone. When she said, "We don't stand here because we avoided pain," something in him cracked. But there was no redemption arc waiting for him. No saving grace. Just time. Back home, Anita and Ethan sat on the back porch one summer evening, watching Eliana chase butterflies in the yard. Anita leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how different it all could have been?" "Every day," he said. "And then I thank God it turned out this way." She smiled. "We should get married soon." He looked down at her. "That was my line." "Well, hurry up and say it again, then." He laughed and pulled her close. "I love you, Anita." "I know. I love you too." The wind carried the scent of jasmine and new beginnings. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan, Anita, and Eliana sat wrapped in a golden kind of peace, one that had been earned, not given. And the past? It had finally let them go. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.